Welcome to Performance Science, a podcast exploring the science of performing and the role of performance in society. I am Professor Aaron Williamon, head of the Centre for Performance Science, a partnership of the Royal College of Music and Imperial College London. Here in the Centre for Performance Science, our research examines and reflects on what performing can tell us about how people interact, develop, work, learn, and play. The podcast encourages us to think differently about the ways in which performing is part of our lives. And in this series, I'm interested in exploring how performers support their own well-being, as well as how they meet the distinctive and sometimes intense challenges of their work. In this third episode, we confront the elephant in the room, the financial instability that plagues the lives of creative professionals, exacerbated by the challenges of freelancing. This is a hugely important topic. It's often central to the lives of creative performers, and we know that it has impacts upon well-being, as well as on the diversity of artists within the industry. The more financial barriers and risks that creative professionals face, the more difficult it is to build and to maintain an inclusive workforce. The pandemic served as a stark reminder of the precarious financial situations many creative professionals find themselves in. As we found in the Hearts Professional Project, 79% of professionals reported experiencing financial hardship at the outset of the pandemic. 3 years later, over 50% still remained in financial hardship. So the initial financial upheaval of the pandemic had a very long tail. We also know from our research that financial hardship is one of the most significant predictors for well-being, with those experiencing financial hardship at greater risk of depression, anxiety, and poor social connectedness. My guests today are Charlotte Penton-Smith from the Royal Society of Musicians and Lynda Rooke from Equity. Lynda, can I start with you? Can you give us a sense of your role at Equity? What does Equity do and how does it support performers?
Sure, I can. So I'm an actor. To start with, and I've been an actor. I work in film, television, theatre, whatever, audio work, etc. But so I'm what's called a lay officer, which means that I'm president of the union, but there's also a general secretary who's the full-time staff member. So whilst I have got duties within Equity, I work in the industry as well. And my role really is to represent the membership of Equity, all 50,000 of them, that, give them their voice within the union and represent them. And when they've got a gripe or they want to say, well done, they usually get hold of me, mostly gripes, but there we go. But no, it's basically, it's passing on the messages, if you like, from the branches, the committees, and the democratic structure of the union. And in cases like this, I'm the one who gets invited along to do chats or whatever. I seem to be constantly on panels about AI at the moment, artificial intelligence. So yeah, that's one of the ones that's a big issue. But the union, it's there. It's a trade union. I stress that many a time. People sort of treat it as, because it has in the past had sort of been called an association, but we are a trade union. So we operate within the Trade Union Congress. And basically, we abide by the rules of the trade union movement, but we are not aligned to any political party. So we are a non-party political trade union, which is useful when we're sort of knocking on doors of politicians, etc., going, we're not very happy with how the performing arts, etc., and the recorded media are being treated. What we do is we negotiate collective agreements across television, film and theatre. And the majority of people working in television today, mainstream television or in theatre, subsidised and commercial, are on our contracts, which is great. Our membership is high and dense in those areas, and we look after our members in terms of health and well-being, whether they're being paid properly, on time, and generally if anybody's failed to pay them when they should have done, who've not, honoured their contracts or whatever, we deal with all that. And we give advice and support on taxation and social security benefits, etc. There's a lot more we do, but that gives you a round idea of we're there for support and advice for 50,000 members working in the entertainment industry.
And to what extent has the union grown over the years? So currently you have 50,000 members. Are you really increasing year on year, or what does the growth look like?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting because it was a steady growth up until COVID. And then COVID saw a massive drop-off of certain sectors in particular, certain demographics. Black women, for instance, we got a report that just after 2019, 44% of women who identify as being from the global majority left the performing arts and left the union consequently. So it's had an impact, COVID, on that side of things. And we are now just picking up again post-COVID as we now emerge the other side with all the frailty that's there.
Charlotte, can you describe the aims and the mission of the Royal Society of Musicians, the RSM? What support does the RSM offer musicians, and how has this changed over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So we exist with one core aim. We work with music professionals across the UK from the start of their careers through to retirement, those musicians who are affected by physical and mental ill health. And we can provide bespoke support, funding, advice and guidance for many needs, whether it be referrals to specialist practitioners, therapies, surgeries, home adaptations, mobility aids, you name it, we can help with it. But we do treat each case as an individual because we really understand that everyone's lives are different. There might be situations in their families that other people don't have. Everyone is different. So we do treat everyone as an individual case and do what we can as much as we can.
We heard from Lynda about some of the changes the pandemic brought to membership of Equity. What sort of changes were you seeing coming through with the way that you work with musicians as a result of the pandemic?
Well, as we all know, the pandemic just destroyed the music profession and obviously all the creative arts. And we really, really saw, interestingly, a drop in the number of beneficiaries coming to us for assistance. And we think it's just because musicians were just struggling to exist, actually, and they were really needing to just put food on the table. We had many people we knew of who actually had to change careers temporarily just to get that money in. But what we did find is that there was a shift of the people who were coming to us for support. Previously, it would be very much physical therapies that we were supporting, obviously overplaying, over practicing. But during the pandemic, that's switched to more mental support, mental health support, for two reasons, really. Firstly, people weren't able to play, so that they were giving their limbs a rest, actually. So in a way, that was a positive thing. But the impact that the pandemic had on the music profession was so devastating that it really did affect so many people's mental health, as we know. And people were coming to us with a lot more mental health needs. And actually, that has continued out of the pandemic and beyond. And we also actually saw an increase in the number of younger musicians coming to us for assistance. And I mean, as government data suggests, the pandemic had a much harder impact on younger musicians, whether that be just the general impact on sort of such a critical time in their lives, or it might have been that the older generations are a bit more established, maybe mortgages are paid off, they don't have sort of quite so much pressures on rents to pay. But we really did find that as well. And again, for us, the younger musicians have continued to come to us, which again, although it's awful that people need our support, because ideally we wouldn't be here as a charity offering support because people would be well. But the fact that people are coming to us and we have a sort of a more younger, sort of higher number of younger musicians, again, is a good thing because it shows that we are out and about a lot more across the younger generations. So yeah.
Can I ask you both to reflect on the extent to which, as your organizations, are you receiving further support within the sector from government or other policymakers or researchers even, or are you really having to lead the way as lone organizations in making a difference in performing artists' lives in this sense?
It's interesting because we obviously operate slightly different to you, Charlotte. But basically, we had been leading it alone because when COVID happened, when the lockdown happened, our members who, if they weren't in work, were usually working in bars, restaurants, doing other jobs to support their income. And of course, they closed down as well. So overnight, income into their lives was, it stopped completely. We started what was called a benevolent fund. We'd always had one which sort of helped out for crises, but overnight, we had to put £1 million in from our coffers just to be able to hand it out to people to cover expenses, to help towards rent and immediate things like that. And also to cover the costs of staying within the trade union, to allow them to have the benefits of all those things. And we are still going through that process of people asking for grants, etc., which are always confidential. Nobody has to know about it. It's all very private, to ask to stay within the union and for their subs to be paid, etc. So, no, it's been difficult because most of our members are freelance and self-employed. And as a consequence, the universal credit, which had the minimum income floor, that many of our members, especially younger ones and people who've just come out of training, etc., suddenly didn't have the actual income that had to prove that they had been in the industry or whatever that covered them being able to be entitled for universal credit. And so we had people literally going without food and utilities. We did a survey of this and we found that 41%, especially of our younger members in particular, but not solely, actually went without food and utilities during that period because they fell through the cracks as freelance self-employed people and weren't able to claim universal credit in the way that they should have been able to do. So one of the things that we're actually pushing back on is getting rid of the minimum income floor. We talked to ministers about that, we talked to the previous government, and we're talking to the latest government that's arrived around all these issues, because people were in a terrible state at that stage. And, it was survival.
Can I just follow up on one point there? So if you're seeing that actors and other performing artists are not able to survive or weren't through that period, does that then stem the flow of artists into the field? Have we seen any decreases in enrollment numbers in acting schools or people who are aspiring to be an actor but perhaps feel they can't because it's just too unstable?
Okay, yeah, and basically I do know that I know of one drama school in particular that is struggling with numbers, and it's not in London. And I think it's really, really sad that is the case. And so you've got the thing of people, one, not being able to afford to go to drama schools. I'll bring class up into it as well as all the other inequalities. So people are considering, well, can I afford to actually sustain a career, go into the drama school, pay the fees and survive the other end, especially if they don't live in London or the South East. So those are really, that's a real issue for people. And also education. We've seen under the last 15 years or so, the demise of performing arts and music in our schools, in particular state schools. And I speak as somebody who was the governor of a very large comprehensive in Bristol and in charge of the performing arts and inclusion. And that was a few years ago. And the more I got involved in equity, I stepped aside from the school. But my children went there. And I have witnessed less subjects being offered at GCSE and A-level, and then going on into further and higher education. We have seen a complete decline in that side of things. And it's usually, as I say, in the state schools which has been most affected. People who view the idea they can't think of the performing arts or creative industries as such as being a career place for them.
Yeah, thank you. Charlotte, could you also give us a bit of the picture around the support for the broader support for musicians beyond the RSM? So who are you working with or how are you working with them?
So collaboration is very, very important to us. Primarily, we're a small organisation. We're a team of 5, which has increased from 3 since the pandemic. So we are growing, but we can't do it all on our own, and we don't expect to. And one thing that we were very sort of challenged by in the pandemic was we are constituted to support musicians whose lives have been impacted by illness, as I said before. But obviously, with the pandemic, nobody was working, but nobody was ill in the way that we would sort of class it. So I actually had to speak to the Charity Commission to see what we could do to help the profession. We had the funds. How could we actually make sure we got the funds to the musicians? So they actually agreed and gave us permission to release extra funds. So a bit like equity, we were able to release funds. We gave out £1.1 million, but that was in collaboration with Help Musicians, who obviously had the capacity. They're a slightly bigger organisation from us, and they agreed to distribute the funds on our behalf. So we were able to continue focusing on the grants bespoke grants for individuals. So I think as far as we're concerned, collaboration is key, and it's all about just understanding what all the organisations are offering, making sure there's not too much overlap, because what we don't want to be doing is making it even more difficult for musicians to apply for support. If there are so many people throwing different sort of application forms at them, it's important that they are clear and there is clarity on where support is. And it's something actually that we are working on at the moment, just to make sure the pathways are clear. And we do communicate that very regularly with our beneficiaries as well. So I think for us, it's very much just sort of as career building, if you like. It's about education and teaching, and people join the profession, all creative arts, because they have this passion and it's their vocation to want to share their love of the arts with the rest of the world, really. But what they quite often can forget is the idea that they are in effect a business, especially if you're a freelancer, and it's really important to have those business skills. So I think it's really important that when you're sort of coming sort of conservatoire age, coming through sort of your training, is to receive teaching and understanding about what it means to run yourself as a business, because obviously you've got your art, you're incredibly passionate about that, but you have to be business savvy to make sure that you can sort of ride the waves. And obviously post-pandemic, we've had cost of living crisis, we've had Brexit, we've had so many challenges in the music profession anyway. So things are it's non-stop, especially for the music profession and probably for the creative arts in general. So people have to be resilient, and it's really tough. But it's unfortunately that's the world that we live in, isn't it? Really. So. And
it's an international scenario that our conservatoire graduates, actors, musicians, and other performing artists are having to go into. They're working in multinational context with people who come in from all over the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the one thing that we're pushing currently with is round about social security and universal credit, and getting rid of the minimum income floor. Just getting rid of it and actually making sure that nobody falls through the cracks like that ever again. And these are in such a desperate state, which is, one of those things. Obviously, Brexit is around there. Many of our members over the years have worked abroad, especially in Europe. A lot of filming went on in what was the former Eastern European countries, Czech Republic, Hungary, places like that were booming just before COVID, with lots of productions that I know people have worked on, and suddenly it's sort of all ground to a halt. One of the things that was trialled, and I'm putting this slightly from outside left field, if you like, but it's happening in Ireland at the moment, is they have something called basic income for artists, and they put this forward a couple of years ago, and it's happening right now. And about 2,000 people from across the creative industries, both visual arts and performing arts, etc., have been chosen to receive a certain amount of money every week, month, whatever, for about 3 years, I think it is. I can't remember, I think it's 3. And basically, there's also going to be what's called a group that didn't receive it, to see the impact, the difference that affects them surviving in the industry. And so far, I hear it's working well, except the one area that we were cautious about, and I know that Jerry O'Brien, who's president of Irish Equity, has also voiced, is the fact that once people get that support, which is fantastic, and it allows them to pursue further training, concentrate on the work that they want to do, be it a musician or an actor or whatever it is. But it then maybe sends a signal to those employers and producers that they don't have to pay as much. Well, they're getting a bit of money anyway, so the wages, stagnate or drop even, and all the terms and the conditions all start to change. And it's about, no, that's not what it's about. And it's making it very clear that we still want to be paid well. We are professionals, and we expect to have good terms and conditions when we are working. The other thing I would say is around funding. The arts councils, or across the 4 nations in the UK. It's been a terrible time around us, because when COVID happened, the money went into the organisations and the buildings. But many of the people who really needed it, again, were the freelance self-employed. So the people working full-time and permanently were already probably being furloughed, etc. But the ones who needed it were no longer employed, were out of work, couldn't access any other support. And the money never did trickle down to those freelance self-employed workers. And there was something wrong in that whole process. And in fact, the whole thing about Arts Council funding, we argue it should be federalised and regionalised. organised much more, especially in England, so that people in local areas have got some control over the funding and making sure they have a voice, a democratic voice in where that funding goes. I mean, you'll know about crises that are going on at the moment in the Welsh National Opera, where there's been problems with funding cuts there. We've got the English National Opera almost overnight being told, you've got to move to Manchester. No consultation, it's caused chaos. Creative Scotland at the moment, which is the Arts Council of Scotland, has been sent backwards and forwards. The Scottish government are in crisis financially, and basically they kept saying, you'll have your money. No, you can't. No, you can't have as much. Yes, you can. And we've just recently heard they are having a massive cut in the funding to the arts in Scotland, a place where I was just over a week ago at the Edinburgh Festival, where it's vibrant. Arts and culture is a massive part of the economy of Scotland, and etc. And suddenly they're being told, no, they're going to be cut.
With regard to other things that you need to know, is there a way in which researchers might be able to help your organizations to uncover further areas for development and support?
I think one thing I forgot to mention earlier actually was, as a result of the pandemic, we actually introduced more health and wellbeing services to our programme. Previously, we just were very much grant giving and that was it. But what we have introduced, one of the things, is a healthy practice webinar series run in partnership with BAPAM. And that enables us to offer something to the profession. And it's very much a preventative sort of measure to make musicians more aware of their own health. And I think for me, that's something that would be very, very welcome, a lot more just general understanding about musicians' own health, whatever it might be, because then obviously it means that people are more aware if there is potentially going to be a problem, which, I mean, there always are problems, but at least they can recognise that more easily, seek help more quickly, and then hopefully get back to work more effectively.
So I work in an educational institution with aspiring young musicians who would like to have careers as professionals and long, successful careers as professionals. I wonder what it is we should start telling our students now to make sure that we prepare them in the best way possible for moving into those long and successful careers. So could you give us some insight? So how can we change our training now to make things better?
I would say join the profession because you love it and because you want to. Work hard, stay positive. There are going to be tough times, as with every career, but just don't lose the passion, I think. Don't lose the sort of your feelings and why you're there. It's such an amazing sector to be part of. I feel so proud of being part of it. I sit behind my desk every day. I'm not out on the stage. It was my absolute choice to do that. But I feel so, it's just such a brilliant, energising profession to be in, I think. So I think just don't lose the passion, stay focused, work hard, and you'll get there.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, we've now just recently opened up that student members, those who are in training or whatever, can join for free at this stage, to come into the union if they've gone through a course or whatever. And we've opened up what those courses can be, not just the limited few academies or conservatoires at whatever. It's a broader spectrum, because one of the areas that we've noticed, for instance, abuse and bullying has been in training establishments as well. And one of the things that we are teaching, it's one of our kind of things, is you mentioned resilience, but we're saying we think there needs to be some resistance. So we move from resilience, putting up with things, tolerating bad behaviour, tolerating long hours, poor pay, etc., to resistance to some of those things. We are a trade union, and we have that voice to put forward those things, to say, no, come on, stop this now. And finally, the other thing I would say is, if you are receiving funding, you're benefiting from it as an institution and organisation, then you should be respecting the workforce that you are employing, and you should be paying proper wages and union negotiated wages at that.
So can I ask you both how the very nature of being a freelancer has an impact on the lives and on the well-being in particular of performing artists?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, we're very aware of the freelancers that we support, because they don't have the safety net that employees have. They're living precariously. If there's an issue and there's no money to sort of help them through that, they are really, really stuck. So we, again, as part of our sort of funding package, if there is a condition that people need a bit more time off work for, that maybe we can't even help with the grant side. It might be a cancer, it might be something very serious. We want to make sure that their focus is on recovery, so we can provide living expenses at that point, which enables people to focus on themselves and not have to worry about bill payments at such a difficult time.
Yeah, likewise with the precarity of the industry in particular, being freelance, self-employed, you can never plan things particularly well, life-wise, financially, etc. And it creates great stress and uncertainty and people lose homes. And we know there's a housing crisis, especially in London and the southeast. And it's that worry about keeping a roof over your head. And if you are a carer or a parent, there's all those added dimensions as well, covering the cost of childcare, etc., or caring for somebody and travel, etc., and all those things that are involved if you don't live in the southeast of the UK. Those are real issues. And also when you are in work, it's pushing back, and this is what the union does, against the long hours and the presenteeism, if you like, of having to be there all the time, working 6 day weeks, regularly, whereas other people are now talking about 4 day weeks. We're still pushing back for a 5 day week, and with certain hours, etc. as well. And that all creates pressure for people, creates pressure within their working lives and within their families, etc. And just their well-being, their emotional well-being. It's about the work-life balance, and that hasn't been achieved before COVID, during COVID, and it's still an issue now causing problems all along, and it needs to be sorted. Can I just say one other thing is that on the back of all that we've been talking about, I read in The Guardian today coming down that there was a research project around Pride of Britain. What makes you proud to be in the UK, to be British? And it was a range of people, a whole different demographics that were asked about this. And the one that got the most of all of the ones was the arts. Over 79% of people said they felt proud or very proud of what the arts are in the UK. We give it a sense of place. We give it a sense of identity, etc., and we entertain, but there is something more for it as well.
So, Lynda, could you tell us about some of the issues that inform health and well-being of actors and other performing artists that you see through equity?
Absolutely. And it's not just to do with stress, although that's very important, and finances and just that work-life balance, but it's also around the fact of we can get issues starting in the audition interview room, or even not the really interview rooms at all, with sexual abuse, harassment and bullying. And it starts there. I won't say we're exclusive, but our industry is bizarrely one of those places where the power and the control in the industry starts there. And the gatekeepers sometimes are abusers or harassers or whatever. Not all, but it's evident from things like the Harvey Weinstein, etc., and the Me Too movement that this has gone on. It's not gone away. We still get reports of these things. And then in the workplace, we have the same thing with people talking about bullying and stress within the workplace. There was an article in The Stage this very week about exactly that topic. And again, it's about the fact that, people feel worried or frightened to be able to speak up because they're worried about their jobs. And that then adds stress to their mental health and well-being because they've got a mortgage to pay or rent to pay or bills to pay, and they don't want to speak out. But it's something that we really are trying to encourage, and we're speaking to our employers, our producers, because they are responsible. In the end, they are responsible for what goes on in the workplace. And we are always picking up the pieces. And sometimes, sadly, it's the police that we have to refer an individual to because it's so awful.
And actually, I'd like to mention here as well, CISA, I don't know if you've come across CISA, the Creative Industry Independent Standards Authority, and they are relatively new on the scene, but they work with exactly this in mind. And actually this month, RSM has announced its support publicly for CISA. Amazing organisation. I think everyone should be aware of them and get involved where they can.
There clearly is a need for change to systems and processes, but those systems and processes also lead to individual consequences. And organizations like the RSM and Equity have to ultimately work with those individuals. And can you say a bit more about how you do that in terms of supporting them through these sorts of problems?
It's knowing that we are always there. I think any organisation that can support individuals, it's very important that they feel they can reach out to us if they're struggling. If they feel that they can't talk to anyone about it, we will be here to have a confidential discussion. And I think it's that first step of just reaching out, whatever it might be. And even if they reach out to the wrong organisation, it's again this idea of collaboration, so that all the organisations that provide this support network know where to refer individuals to if there is a crisis that they need support to.
Absolutely. We've got a safe spaces statement.
Yeah.
And we always say that if you are working in a company that is under an equity contract, or even if you're not, but actually, at the beginning of rehearsals, or even in our meetings in equity, we read the safe spaces statement. And basically that becomes a foundation from which you work. But also within our collective agreements, we also have something in there which actually says that you're entitled to call something out if it's inappropriate and actually report it. And it can be done anonymously, which is really, really important. And obviously BAPAN, like you, we use them for, counselling and support like that. And sadly, as I say sometimes, it's the police.
These are all tricky areas for young aspiring artists to tackle, but in the context of organizational support behind them, it can really give them a sense of empowerment. Thank you to my guests, Charlotte Penton-Smith and Lynda Rooke, and to you for listening. In the next episode of Performance Science, I'll be asking how we can empower professional artistic communities. Thanks to production support from Caitlin Shaughnessy, Frederick Lamb, and Michael Durrant of the Center for Performance Science, Nick Flatt at Panda, Chris Garrington of Research Podcasts, and the Arts and Humanities Research Council for their generous support.